And welcome to Running with God. I'll be your host. My name is Janae, and I'll be here throughout the series. Hello, and welcome back to Running with God. We're going to begin studying again on the Nephilim and the seed of woman and the seed of man and also the seed of Satan. Now, if you haven't joined us before and you're not caught up to where we're at, there are the Nephilim series 1 through 5, and you can catch up with us and get to speed to where we're at. And we're glad to have each and every one of you here with us today. And we're going to start off in Genesis 3 and 15, and it says, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." Now, the reason why I'm reading that is because we need a couple of background scriptures. We've gone over this scripture before, but we're going to go over it in a different way today. We also will be referring to the book of Ruth. Many of you know the story of Ruth, Naomi and Ruth, and of her sister, Ruth's sister, Orpah. Whenever the mother and the two sisters became widows, they needed to figure out what they needed to do. And we see that Ruth stayed with Naomi, her mother-in-law, and we see that Orpah decided to go back to Moab. Now, there is some meaning behind that, because when Ruth stayed with Naomi, that means she stayed in the ways of the Lord, and she did not turn not only her back away against Ruth, but she against Naomi, but she also did not turn her back on the Lord. Now, when Orpah decided to go back to Moab, she also went back into the ways of the pagan roots that she came out of, and she became lost. And we find that because of the faithfulness of Ruth to Naomi, even though it was not easy at first, that she ends up meeting a man named Boaz, and Boaz is a kinsman of Naomi's husband. And when you were a widow, you needed someone to take you and to make you redeemed. She needed to be redeemed, and because of this, we find the relationship that she builds with Boaz is very important. He goes ahead and he marries her, and as in this covenant from the marriage, we see redemption is brought forth through that line. I want to tell you that line is a line that Jesus came from. We see in Ruth 4 and 22, and it talks about this. It says that because of this, Obed was born, and Jesse, the father of David. So we know that David became king, and he, through him, was the lineage of Jesus through Mary. Okay, so that's important. Now we look at Orpah, and we go look and see her decision that she made, and she went to Moab. She chose that life back into the paganism, as we said before. She left behind the ways of the Lord and all that she had known. She ends up marrying a Rephaim. What is a Rephaim? A Rephaim is a Nephilim, a descendant of the fallen mixed with man. Alright? So we're going to look at this where it talks about Orpah was married to a Rephaim. We think it is Rapha. There is a little bit of a question there if it is for sure the father. But Rapha does mean Rephaim. And Rephaim has two meanings. Rephaim meaning that is a giant race of tall beings that are mixed with man and angels, fallen angels. And also it means beings that once they die, they cannot be redeemed. Okay, remember that. They cannot be redeemed. Now I want you to hold that thought as we continue. Now we're going to look into Isaiah in chapter 26 and verse 14. And this is speaking of those that we just spoke about. It says, they are dead, they shall not live. They are deceased, they shall not rise. Therefore hast thou visited and destroyed them, and made all their memory to perish. It's telling us once they're destroyed, they will not be risen from the grave like we will, like man. But both good and the bad, both redeemed and unredeemed, will be risen in the end. In Revelation it speaks of this, and then they will be judged. Well, these will not be judged the way that man will be judged, even though they're part man, because they are not redeemable. They are clay, earthen vessels, with a spirit that came from not the Lord, but from the fallen. So therefore, they have no soul to be redeemed from the curse of the law of sin and death. They are illegitimate. Alright? People will say, oh, how can that be? Because they're part human and Jesus died for all flesh. No, that's not what it says. You need to look at the whole picture, not just one scripture taken out of context. We're going to go back to where we started a while ago with Ruth and the importance of that line with Jesus coming out of it. You know, Ruth was redeemed because of the union she had and the covenant that was made with Boaz. Now out of that covenant comes forth Jesus later, and he is the redeemer of our soul. He is the redeemer of mankind by his blood and through his sacrifice on the cross, and him going to and getting the keys to death, hell, and the grave, and risen on the third day, ascended to the Father. He has completed that task. It was finished on the cross. Now I want you also to look here, whenever we looked at Orpah and the meaning behind what she became. It is thought that she is the mother of Goliath. So we see two sisters taking different paths. One, the ways of the Lord, and the other, into darkness. And we see David and Goliath potentially here as cousins meeting each other on the battlefield. We know that David took 5 smooth stones with him, and we understand what he did with them. But we're going to look at 1 Samuel in chapter 17 and verse 49, and it says, and David put his hand in his bag, and he took him a stone, one stone, and he slang it, and he smote the Philistine in his forehead. That stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore he ran, and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out on the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. Now I want you to think about this. He took that one stone, and what did he do with that one stone? He crushed the head of Goliath. Remember that scripture we read? I'll put enmity between thee and that woman, and between the seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. This is foreshadowing. It is prophetic of what will happen through the line of David when Jesus comes forth and dies on the cross. When he was on that cross, his heels were bruised. They had put those spikes through his feet, through the heel, and it was bruised. Now look, the 5 smooth stones. There's some significance to that. David knew he would only need 1 stone. He trusted the Lord. What do you think those other stones were for? I want to submit to you that I believe they were because he knew there were 4 other giants. 4 other giants that might come along. Those 4 giants were also kin to Goliath. And we are going to go ahead and look and see who these are. Alright. We're going to go to 2 Samuel. It says, "And there was yet a battle in Gath, where a man of great stature had on every hand 6 fingers, on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number, and he was also born to the giant. And when he defiled Israel, Jonathan the son of Shema, the brother of David, slew him. And these 4 were born to the giant in Gath, and fell by the hand of David, and by the hand of his servants." And those verses 20 through 22. You see, these are the 4 that I have mentioned before, where these other stones could have come into play. It is something to think about. You know, most of the time we stop on David and Goliath, where he slew Goliath, and we think about how we have to have faith in the Lord, and we must have trust in the Lord. And when we have faith in the Lord and trust in Him, that He will go before us, which that is true. But there is more to that. It is a story of playing out of redemption here. There is a story of redemption from David's grandmother, Ruth, to him standing before Goliath and crushing his head. Now, he didn't want him to get up because of the fact that he crushed him in the head. He wanted to go ahead and cut his head off just in case. You know, and what I'm fixing to say is speculation, but there are things written in Jewish history that refer to some of these as waking back up if they'd been wounded, like they healed quickly. And I can't say whether that's true or not. And I can only think of something that comes to me that may be familiar to you. There used to be a show called The Highlander whenever I was very young. And they would go around cutting the heads off to make sure that these half and halves could not regenerate. If they were wounded in any way, without their heads cut off, they could regenerate. And somehow I wonder, maybe, if there's some truth in that. You know, I can't say positively or not, and I'm not telling you that's a biblical fact. I'm just telling you that is a thought to think about here. Now, I want you also to think, it tells us in Samuel that he cut off the head and then he presents the head to Saul. Now let's look at what happened in 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 54. It says, "And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, Inquire thou whose son this stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, Whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant, Jesse the Bethlehemite. Now one smooth stone that represented Jesus, the cornerstone, crushed the head of Satan. One smooth stone crushed the seed that represented him, with Goliath. And it's said in historical records that they believe that Goliath's head was put on a stake and put on the hill of Golgotha. I'm not sure if that is correct or not, but it's fitting because Jesus died on Golgotha. Golgotha was the place in which Christ defeated the seed of Satan. God bless you. I hope you've enjoyed this study today. Keep running with God.